Welcome to Armenian Alliance Conversations. I'm Manyak Sakian. One of the organizations that formed in response to the Artsakh War of 2020 is an organization called the Center for Truth and Justice, CFTJ. The Center for Truth and Justice is a nonprofit organization that was established by a group of lawyers in November 2020 to oversee the collection of firsthand testimony evidence from Artsakh War survivors via in depth recorded interviews. The CFTJ has law clinics in Armenia and Artsakh. At these clinics, experts train Armenian law students and young lawyers to interview survivors of the Artsakh War and to record their testimonies. These eyewitness testimonies are a resource for academics and lawyers to use for academic purposes and for legal cases as well. My guest today is Meline Mailyan, Esquire. She's an attorney who is one of the co founders of the Center for Truth and Justice. She currently serves as a board member and manages public relations for the CFTJ. Ms. Mailyan is a community activist and a passionate advocate for immigrants. In 2013, she established her immigration law practice in Glendale, California. She has also been raising awareness about the Armenian genocide as well as other unrecognized acts of crimes against humanity. Ms. Mailyan earned a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in Russian languages from UCLA. She received her Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Davis School of Law. Melina, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be our guest today.
My pleasure.
Before we begin our conversation today, I feel obligated to issue a warning to our viewers. We will be talking about war crimes, which is a difficult topic for all of us. Some people may find it overwhelming emotionally to even listen to factual descriptions of violence and war crimes, and that is completely understandable. Our purpose is not to shock people with graphic descriptions of violence, but we also have an obligation to speak the truth in a way that is similar to what you might find in a news article or a news report. Meline, please tell us, what is the Center for Truth and Justice and what does it do?
Thank you. Thank you for your beautiful introduction, and the warning that you also issued towards the end was very uh, important because that's exactly what the Center for Truth and Justice does. Something that a lot of people might find disturbing, might find difficult to process, but that's the type of work that needs to be done. And this is a project that came about literally right after the war ended. I could say when the trilateral announcement was announced. So that's when the center was came about. Um, the main thing, there's a lot of things that the center does, and I'm hoping we're going to talk about it throughout the interview. But the main thing that the center does is to collect eyewitness testimonies from the war survivors um, from the most recent Artsakh 2020 war. So what we do is we train the law students, upper level law students. We pair them up with licensed United States U.S. attorneys from here. We pair them up. They provide mentorship, transfer of experience, knowledge, and all of that. So the law students then go out there on the field and interview war crime victims, eyewitness testimonies. And then these testimonies are then utilized to create various reports. They're used in litigation. The most important one that was recently used was with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the UN court filing. So it's the preservation of evidence, and that's kind of the lesson that I think we Armenians need to learn because we've had genocides, we've had Sumgait pogroms, and all of that, but at least I'm not aware of any organized way of preserving the evidence in a fashion that we are doing, and meaning in a legal manner. This is not just us going out as journalists asking questions and recording things. No, things are done in a proper format, authenticity, chain of custody, confidentiality. All those legal norms are preserved and taught to the students. So that at any point in time, if we need to use this evidence in court, we're not going to have any issues with it. So that's the main thing that the center does.
Just to give people an idea of how to join the CFTJ and how it works. So, my first question is, if I'm an Armenian law student or a lawyer, or even a lawyer in the United States who's willing to volunteer for the organization, how would I go about doing that? And then also, you have an application process for people who want to be part of the CFTJ law clinics. So after the participants are selected and they show up to the law clinic in Armenia or Artsakh,
Hmm.
what happens from that point?
So exactly, like you said, you could think about it, CFTJ having pretty much three different locations. One is the United States, the other one is in Yerevan, Armenia, and then obviously Stepanakert, Artsakh, because that's like the hotbed, where the evidence is pretty much being collected. As far as joining CFTJ here from the United States, you would have to be an attorney or an undergrad student interested in international law, humanitarian law, human rights law that could help us out with some of the administrative duties, but also some of our actually undergrad interns are really great at doing a lot of research, some legal research and writing, and that's a great way to prepare them for law school too. Besides the fact that they are immersed into this network of attorneys who could become their mentors. I mean, we're talking about 30 plus attorneys, and then our judge, who's a sitting judge in Orange County. So there's a lot of networking opportunities that's kind of given to the law students here in the United States or potential law students. But obviously, emphasis is on the attorneys to join. And what you could do is pretty much just email us info@cftjustice.org. You could find us on various social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook. All you need to do is send us a direct message that you're interested, and we'll do a small orientation. And you could join. There's projects for everyone. If you're interested in legal research and writing, you could do that. If you want to be a team lead, meaning mentor the student in Armenia, you could do that. There's so many things happening. We'll find something for you. As far as the law clinics are concerned in Armenia and Artsakh, it's a little bit different process. It's an application process, and you have to be an upper level law student. And we are working with pretty much all law schools, both in Armenia and in Artsakh. So the law schools, for example, the Yerevan State University, the French University, the Armenian American University, and the Russian Armenian University, and obviously the Artsakh State University. So you would apply through them. And if you are selected, our application period actually ended for this year, for this upcoming academic year, but it's going to be announced again for the next year. So people could be applying for 2023, 2024 period. But we have selected already applicants for 2022, 2023, and what it does is the program starts in September. So first 2 months you have lecture series because people have to learn what they're doing. What is it that they're collecting the evidence for? Like if they go out and they talk to, I don't know, Artur Sarkisian, for example, Artur is going to be asking, who are you? Why am I providing this evidence? Why do I have to tell you the most horrific events about my life to you? What are you going to do with it? Are you going to keep it a secret? Is it confidential? So all those little details, because you can't just go out and ask people, these important things to talk about without telling them what it's for. But obviously, the students won't know what to answer unless they know they have the theoretical background, which is why the first 2 months, September and October, there's weekly lecture series where we have guest professors from different universities, judges here from the United States remotely via Zoom. We teach them what is evidence, what is ethics, what is confidentiality, what is fact versus opinion, so that these students are prepped to go and be on the field. We actually have staff in Armenia who are able to manage all of this. So when the students are ready, they monitor, they supervise their interviewing, but also each pair of law students, they're paired up. So each two law students are paired up with a U.S. attorney. So there's that mentorship there. There's that overseeing, supervising. So when they go and actually interview a person, We watch the videos here and, give them feedback. Maybe you could have asked this question. Maybe you need to follow up this. Or a person could start talking about the first Artsakh War, the early 90s. That's kind of important, and they may have skipped that portion, so they would have to go back. So it's kind of an ongoing process. But if you think about it, it's like two important goals that are being achieved here. One of them is obviously preservation of evidence, but second, it's the educational component that we are preparing these law students to become experts when it comes to international law, to be engaged in those areas, because that's something that Armenia needs. So the law students are our future leaders. So it's a beautiful kind of marriage of both you're getting your evidence, but at the same time you're training your future leaders. So.
That's one thing that I want to emphasize, because this is an organization in which you have highly trained, very experienced professionals
Mhm.
in the United States trying to share their expertise in Armenia with young law students and lawyers to meet a certain goal.
Exactly.
And this is something that is talked about a lot in the diaspora, this kind of collaboration between the resources, the human resources that we have in the diaspora with Armenians and in Armenia. And this is really a model, an inspirational model for something that is happening already on such an important goal that you're trying to meet.
Right. One thing I remember, I think it was Mr. Artsakh Beglarian. He used to be the Artsakh ombudsman. Now he's a state minister. But when he visited Los Angeles, this is kind of something that we knew, but we still wanted to ask him. And we asked, what do you need? First and foremost, what does Artsakh need? And his answer was capacity building. It's not always about money. It's not always about the $100, $200 that you're sending. But if you're not giving them your time, your experience, transfer of knowledge, that $100 is going to be, spent, and the next day they're going to need the $100 again. But if you do the capacity building, transfer of knowledge and experience, that's a value that's not going to be lost. So that's what's really, the center is about. We're not passing around donations. We're not doing that. Not that it's not needed. I'm not trying to undermine the work that other organizations are doing, but at least this type of transfer of knowledge is also as important as, the money going into both Armenia and Artsakh.
No, I completely agree, because anyone who's studied economics or business, we understand that human capital is actually much more valuable
Exactly.
than, actual cash. Just to kind of make a crude assessment, you can't hire an attorney, I don't think, anywhere in the United States for less than, $300 an hour.
Hmm.
And here you have a lot of highly successful attorneys managing their own careers and at the same time volunteering many, many hours of their time to do something really good.
Exactly. Yes. We're not even counting our time, honestly. And I do want to stress that everyone here in the United States, and we have, like I said, close to 30 attorneys and our judge, this is not a paid position for any one of us. So not a single penny is spent on administrative stuff here in the United States. We do have staff in Armenia because it's a little bit different. There's logistics involved, the students are involved, so there's a lot more supervising happening over there. Plus, we could afford to put in the time and donating actually into our own organization so that it runs. So yeah, definitely.
How many people has the CFTJ interviewed to date? And how many people do you usually have on the ground at one time interviewing people?
So we have collected, last I checked, I think close to over 350 interviews with testimonial evidence. And these are audio, video testimonies. This is not an affidavit that's written on a piece of paper. If you think about it, we're trying to replicate Shoah Foundation. I'm not sure if you know much about them, but they have done, yeah, exactly. They have done audio, video, visual testimonies of survivors of, Holocaust. And so many movies are made, based on those stories. So much is being done from just because of the testimonies that they have collected. So that would be the number. As far as the number of people we have on the field, so pretty much all the students. And so the students would be, we have about 22 students on that are working constantly throughout the year, throughout each academic year. And they graduate sometime in June. But we do have staff also. We have 4 people in Yerevan and then 2 in Artsakh that are collecting testimonies throughout the year. So those, the staff members do not stop collecting testimonies, and they actually do some of the complicated ones. For example, if we have a POW interview, we can't just give it to a new student who just learned what they need to, how to collect evidence or how to interview a witness. So that's something that's done by a staff member. So you could say we have over 20 people, most of the time of the year collecting evidence.
You're one of the co-founders of the CFTJ. Please tell us who was involved in the beginning and how did CFTJ come into existence?
So it's actually not a funny story, but an interesting one because it was not planned. It just came about, and that's what's beautiful about CFTJ because it came out of need. No one planned to be, sending students or ourselves into the field and collecting testimonial evidence. But I'm literally having goosebumps as I'm talking because I remember the days, when the war ended, when it was clear that, Armenia has lost. If you remember, there were videos of people burning their homes, circulating through various social media accounts. And there was an attorney, Irene Tatevosyan. She circulated a video in English saying, you need to preserve evidence, don't burn your homes, preserve the deeds, journals, photos, anything that you have that could prove ownership later on. So, and we were talking prior to that too, and I reached out to her. I'm like, Irene, this video has to be in Armenian. Like, no one's going to understand English. Like, Armenians in Artsakh or people fleeing their homes, they need the Armenian version. So literally, I translated the video within 5 minutes. Didn't even practice. It was just a one take. The video was posted on my Instagram and Facebook. Within a few minutes, my friends, family members are texting, did you see this person shared it? And like within a few days, over 1 million people had watched the video. It got circulated. It just went viral on me. I didn't even plan that to happen. And then one of the people who reached out because of the video is Judge Garcia Abkarian. And she told me, hey, Melina, we actually lost something in Kelbajar, an investment, so what do we do about it? We have the paperwork. I actually didn't even know she's a judge at a time. She didn't introduce herself as a judge. So I'm like, well, we need to preserve it. Who else lost it? Do you have evidence for that? So we started talking. But also my friend Tamara Avaskanyan, we were also talking on the side, like how could lawyers be involved in general? So then the idea of collecting and preserving evidence came about, and we just started working without even knowing where this is going to take us. We had no contracts, nothing. We didn't even have a solid plan as to where this is going to take us, but we knew we had to collect the evidence. So we started preparing the forms. We got in touch with the Russian Armenian University. Again, none of us had the experience of collecting such testimonies, but we just knew we had to get started. So that's how CFTJ got, was formed. And after 6 months, we realized that it's pretty successful. And then the Armenian American University joined, and then the French University joined, and then the state university. We thought that this is a great potential for the Armenian students. Again, it's capacity building, investing into our human capital, but at the same time preserving the evidence.
Armenia brought a case against Azerbaijan in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. During the oral arguments for this case, attorney Sean David Murphy, representing Armenia, talked about the work that the CFTJ had done in interviewing former POWs who were held in Azerbaijan. This is regarding one of the major allegations of war crimes against Azerbaijan, which is the abuse of Armenian POWs being held in Azerbaijan. Can you tell us more about what the CFTJ uncovered during these interviews with former POWs?
These are this goes to your warning pretty much of the graphic content and all of that. And I'm not really going to talk too much about like the horrific details that we get to hear. But these are some of the most difficult interviews to watch, and I have to be honest, I haven't watched one till the end. It's just so difficult to start watching. It's like PTSD trigger for every single Armenian when you start watching, and you just go back to those days. And the stories that you hear are horrific. But we included in the ICJ filing that you are referencing, we submitted a report to the ICJ and to the law firm that was representing Armenia and to the Yagishe Girakosyan's office as well, again, who's representing Armenia in this court. The report was about POWs and their treatment. So this is not some rumors. This is not something that we read somewhere. These are the repatriated, returned POWs talking about their own abuse. So these are credible, valid testimonies that we used in our report. Um, the it's difficult to talk about the instances of abuse, but um, some examples, for example, that was in the report is tooth pulling, nail pulling, like things like that, or being thrown out of a huge truck. It's just horrific details that these soldiers provided, these POWs provided, that were included in the report. And again, in collecting these testimonies, every single legal norm was, taken into consideration so that even at that highest level, the UN court, our evidence could be admissible. Because in legal field, we have something called admissibility. The evidence has to be reliable. It has to be authenticated. There has to be a chain of custody. Who saw the video? Where is it saved? Who else had a chance to look at it, or things like that. I don't want to go into too much legal details, but these are important stuff, and making sure that your evidence is credible and admissible.
We have many Armenian POWs who were tried and convicted in Azerbaijan of ridiculous charges in sham trials, where they had no way to defend themselves against baseless criminal charges. The prison sentences that these POWs received are real, and they are now serving these sentences in Azerbaijan's prison system, which is reportedly one of the worst in the world, especially for prisoners the Aliyev regime does not like.
Right. So obviously, we all hear about those convictions and what's going on, the sham trials pretty much happening. So as far as CFTJ is concerned, so we're not litigating our own cases. There's a difference between collecting evidence as an objective, neutral party and then litigating, or bringing those cases to court. That's what litigating means, like filing lawsuits, for example. But at the same time, we use our testimonies that we collect and produce reports that are being filed, for example, or sent to the members of Congress, or senators, congressmen, the UN cert filing that we recently had. So then, because this is a politically, sensitive kind of an issue, so we're trying to create enough political pressure with our reports, with our filings, so that could be used in asking for our POWs back. So it's kind of not a direct route in protecting or representing these POWs, because you can't even provide representation, because it's a double-edged sword. In my opinion, if you do provide representation, that's kind of in a way admitting that these are legit trials happening. So that's, again, that's something that was discussed very extensively when these sham trials were beginning to happen. But for example, I want the viewers to understand that when we say a report is filed in the United States Congress, there's a direct link, to the POWs that are tried in Azerbaijan. Every single time the US or the UN filing is made, there's a direct link to the POWs and how they can be used. It can't be looked in isolation. You can't just say, oh, they filed it, so what's going to happen? But if you have enough reports of violation, for example, of the ICJ ruling that was recently filed, in a sense, you're trying to isolate Azerbaijan in the international courts and international arena to destroy their reputation, their credibility, and that kind of puts or gives the Armenian government or whoever is going to be negotiating enough political pressure or advantage to be asking for one or two POWs to be returned back.
In my opinion, these POWs who were put on trial, I think they could have had the finest lawyers in the world, and they still had no chance of winning their cases because the
Absolutely.
trial itself is an absolute sham.
Exactly. Which is why, like I said, there was an extensive discussion about their representation, but you don't even want that because you're um, playing their own dirty game by taking a part, in those trials.
You brought us to my next question, which is that the CFTJ wrote two white papers. One was about the disappearance of Armenian POWs while in Azerbaijan's custody. The other white paper was about Azerbaijan's torture and mistreatment of Armenian POWs. Please explain what a white paper is
Mhm.
and what was the purpose of these white papers.
Of course. So to your first question, what is a white paper? A white paper, it's kind of like a political term, you could say. It's when it's a complicated or sophisticated issue and you're trying to explain the situation to a party that may not be as involved. So for example, to the US congressman that we wrote this white paper for, we're trying to explain what the issue is with the POWs, what the issue is with Nagorno-Karabakh. So that's what a white paper is. It's taking something super complicated and explaining it to a party that's not really involved in the process. So the very first one that was written was about the mistreatment, the torture of the POWs, and again, those were based on the repatriated prisoners of wars and their testimonies. But the second one, and this is the one that's not as much talked about, and not in terms of the white paper, but in terms of this problem in and of itself, because there is a group of prisoners or people who are just missing in action. Okay, and these people, uh, Azerbaijan denies, having them in their custody. So no one knows where these people are. No one knows if they're dead, if they're alive. Where it's as if they do not even exist or never even existed. So that's what the second white paper was about, which was the supplemental one. Because, like I said, there's a large group of people. I cannot remember the number. I have to go back to my notes, but it's a large enough group. They were captured, so there is evidence of Azerbaijanis, capturing them. We have those videos, but no one knows what happened to them, and Azerbaijan denies having them in their custody. So that's what the second supplemental paper was about.
International law is a very complex topic. I commend your team because you have kept your website very straightforward and accessible to the layperson. You have a page on your website that summarizes the main well known war crimes that Azerbaijan is accused of during the 44-day Karabakh War of 2020, which include indiscriminate attacks on civilians, destruction of cultural and religious heritage, such as churches that were bombed, targeting people with white phosphorus munitions, which cause horrible glowing burns that don't heal, the recruiting of Syrian mercenaries, the killing of Armenian POWs, and the abuse of POWs being held in Azerbaijan. Can you speak about these allegations as it relates to the work that the CFTJ is doing?
This is how I'll answer the question. Pretty much 90% of the war crimes that you mentioned, or issues that you raised, allegations that you raised, with the evidence that CFTJ has collected, those allegations become facts, become actual realities. And that's why our work is so important, because it's no longer an allegation, because we have a witness whose testimony we have collected and explains how he was burned because of a white phosphorus. He shows his, burnt marks. We have people who have suffered from drone attacks, civilians. I'm not talking about soldiers, but civilians who have been injured, or families whose relative has been killed because of a drone attack. So what CFTJ does is we're literally turning those allegations into factual evidence.
I want to emphasize that there are many other war crimes that Azerbaijan is accused of. For example, there are multiple reports of Azerbaijani soldiers dressing up as Armenian soldiers to ambush Armenians and kill them. There are multiple instances of ambulances and medical personnel being targeted and killed. There are reports of humanitarian aid workers being targeted. There are reports of Russian and French journalists being targeted to discourage reporting about the war. Some of these war crimes the CFTJ has listed in a chart on their website, and along with a citation which shows the article of international law that it violates.
Mm-hmm. The document that you are referring to, we pretty much opened it up to everyone, so that, because things were flowing on the social media. It was as if it's an open source investigation. So people were able to send us, such instances of war crimes, so that we could add it to our own chart. And then that was actually used, for example, on July 13th, when we filed our third report with the UN. Those instances, or those violations, were used in that report as well. But what I wanted to say is that you read various types of, violations or war crimes. There's a lot more to that, and they get a lot more gross. I don't want to. One thing I will mention, that for example, organs missing from some of the soldiers, and that's something that's not talked about. It didn't happen to many, but that's an issue that we're also looking into it. And again, this is something that's not talked about a lot, but um, yeah, I mean, it can't get worse than that, in my opinion. But um, it's someone has to do the dirty work, and you could imagine how difficult it is for our students to be, collecting these testimonies. We're not talking about trained professionals who are in their, I don't know, 40s or 50s, who have done this for many years. We're talking about young students in their 20s who are collecting these testimonies. Luckily, we are able to provide mental health training as well, so that, they're safe. They know how to deal with trauma. Um, for example, if some of the witnesses, they are unable to talk, they start crying, or there's PTSD triggered, they just, stop talking. There's a lot of things that happen during an interview, and that's again another, like, the student has to have a healing mechanism, and that's the type of support that's also provided to them. And again, it talks about their professional growth as well. So that's also an important factor, an important experience that these students are getting.
Melina, as I mentioned earlier, you have been active for a long time in raising awareness of the Armenian genocide. During the Artsakh War of 2020,
Hmm.
Genocide Watch warned that Armenians in Artsakh are at risk of genocide. Genocide Watch has defined 10 stages of genocide. The following statement was written in a Genocide Watch report issued on November 2020. I quote, because of Azerbaijan's invasion of Artsakh in September 2020, Genocide Watch considers Azerbaijan to be at stage 9, extermination, and at stage 10, denial. Genocide Watch considers that Azerbaijan's leadership may intend to forcibly deport the Armenian population of Artsakh by committing genocidal massacres that will terrorize Armenians into leaving Artsakh. End quote. Do you believe that Azerbaijan intended to massacre and commit genocide against the civilian population of Artsakh?
I do. I mean, why else would you bomb a maternity ward? Why else would you bomb their churches? Why else would you, target civilians? If this is a war, the soldiers should be your target. But there's just so many instances. I mean, they're talking about peaceful leaving, just peace treaty or Artsakh living within Azerbaijan. It's just impossible. That's just gonna lead to ethnic cleansing and to genocide. It's impossible. I mean, we have reports on a daily basis. Shootings happening. Um, the treatment of POWs in and of itself, or the psychological abuse that they go through, not just the physical one. These are all proof that what Azerbaijan did, especially during a pandemic in Armenia, in Artsakh, excuse me, is equivalent to genocide.
I agree. I believe it as well. And I think the intent was pretty clear because the ultimate goal of the Aliyev regime is to drive the Armenians
Out of
from the
Artsakh,
territory that they call Karabakh
exactly.
by any means necessary. And as we have seen, as we have talked about up to this point, we can see some of the means that they have utilized, which honestly, for reasonable people, are beyond human comprehension as to how people can do things like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's undeniable at this point. Their targets, hospital bombing to me was just uh, why? If this is a war, if this is a military, operation, why would you target a hospital?
It is no secret that Azerbaijan has used every resource that money can buy to try to counter the accusations of violations of international law, for which Armenians have eyewitnesses and evidence. For example, there was a well known case of a video created by Azerbaijani soldiers which showed the execution of two Armenian men in Artsakh. Azerbaijan absurdly claimed that the video was staged by Armenians, like a Hollywood movie. The BBC had the video independently analyzed by experts, which proved its authenticity.
Hmm.
There's another well known video which shows the ground shaking as a street in Stepanakert is bombed. We have so much photographic evidence of war crimes, such as bombed, partially destroyed structures, giant bomb craters next to single homes, an unexploded munition in the middle of a soccer field. The worst kind of evidence are the videos that clearly show torture and beheadings, circulated on social media by Azerbaijani soldiers who committed these gruesome acts. We have documented the beheaded and mutilated bodies of Armenians. Despite all of this, Mr. Aliyev has personally made statements categorically denying all accusations of war crimes. Representatives from Azerbaijan have made many false statements in international forums and have made ridiculous accusations against Armenia. Tamara Voskanyan is an ethics attorney, and she is one of the founders of the CFTJ, as you mentioned. She said to Forbes, "What the CFTJ does is bear witness to the stories of war survivors, create a record of the stories, and secure the records so that no one can ever try to rewrite the stories. In a world of fake news where the truth gets constantly buried, we believe firsthand testimonies are one of the last few reliable sources of evidence." There are two different things that we have to address in the modern world. One is the court of public opinion, and the other is actual legal venues, like international courts, where evidence is presented. How powerful and effective are eyewitness accounts in actual courts and in the court of public opinion?
Well, I think they're super related. First of all, the public opinion does respect what's going on in the, court of law. So, but it's a tricky subject. It could be initiated in either, field. In our case, well, we don't have the resources right now to concentrate both in a public opinion and in a court of law. So we're trying to use it in a court of law, at least for CFTJ. but it's extremely important. It is extremely important. I keep talking about the UN report, but for example, we have been around less than 2 years. And with the report, we've already been asked to speak at the UN, at the NGO meeting that's going to be happening in few days, actually, August 8th. And this is an important meeting because it's a reassessment of Azerbaijani's membership in, for the third convention. So these reports do matter. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, isolating Azerbaijan in a court of law or in international arenas, that's what we have to be doing. We're not going to be alleging or issuing opinions. We're going to be providing factual, basis for our reports. It's not Meline Mailyan who's saying, this. There are evidence of POWs being tortured. No, it's the POW himself who's testifying about the abuse. So it's not, as we like to call hearsay evidence, but this is direct testimonial evidence that's going to be used. And I mean, Aliyev could sit there. I mean, we all remember the famous interview with the BBC journalist, and he just kept saying fake news. It's just fake news. I mean, he could just keep on saying that, but who cares, right? I mean, it's just it was humiliating to watch. And if these people are, watching that and they're not doing anything about it, that's their problem at this point. But I mean, he was humiliated at the world stage. I want to say, and we just have to create more and more opportunities for him to be humiliated in such a way.
Well, I think that interview is a perfect example because it just shows that these denials don't stand up to journalistic scrutiny because the journalist who was interviewing Aliyev, she was saying, okay, well, what about this evidence that we have? Or what about these journalists that provided an eyewitness account? Or what about this happening?
Hmm.
I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but essentially she was just rebutting with all of these actual facts and experiences that journalists experienced while they were covering the war. And all he could say was fake news. I think even a child wouldn't really by that interpretation
Hmm.
of just plain basic denial.
They have his administration has created such a culture of Armenophobia that anything about Armenians, is pretty much accepted in the society, and that's a huge issue. The issue of Armenophobia in Azerbaijan. That's their policy, and that's something that was in, again, provisional decision measures implemented by ICJ, and that's something that we talked about extensively in our report. Um, because if you go back and listen or read the orders, it actually has something about President Aliyev himself, like that he needs to abstain from making remarks or insults about Armenians and all of that. But even after, in between December 2021 and June of this year, 2022, there are more than 12 or 13, I think, instances of Aliyev himself making insulting remarks about Armenians. And that's a problem in and of itself when the head of the country is spreading Armenophobia.
One thing that I want to talk about that I think some people may think about is the videos that I was referring to earlier of beheadings and beatings and different things that were put on a messaging service called
Mm-hmm.
Telegram, which is widely used in Azerbaijan, and it's also widely used in Armenia and
Mm-hmm.
Russia and different countries. you know, the reasonable question is, let's say that you're inhumane in some way that I can't comprehend and you're committing war crimes. Okay, that's horrible in itself. But why would you put the videos on a social media app knowing that potentially you might be held accountable in some way? And I mean videos where they actually show their faces. So, my hypothesis is that these soldiers put these videos on Telegram because they expect to be recognized either popularly by the people of Azerbaijan or even by the Aliyev regime, because we have a terrible precedent in a murderer named Ramil Safarov,
Correct.
who was famously recognized and rewarded by Aliyev. And this is a
Hmm.
very famous case that's known all over Azerbaijan.
That's right. And, as you were talking, I also remember that case, stabbing of a lieutenant, I believe, at a NATO conference in Hungary, if I'm not mistaken. But that's exactly right. The videos that are being posted is just a way of them saying, "Look what I did," and they're so proud of it. Like they're not even trying to hide it. So there's no sense of accountability, meaning they're not going to be punished. They're not going to be. There's no deterrence. That's like we use that a lot in criminal justice system. There's no deterrence mechanism in Azerbaijan when it comes to crimes committed against Armenians. Okay, and that's if you think about it, that argument in and of itself could be used against Azerbaijan and international various, forums in advocating for the fact that there is no peace for Artsakh within Azerbaijan because they're going to be subjected to ethnic cleansing. This is what's going to happen. There's no way to punish anyone who's going to insult, kill, assault an Armenian living in Artsakh. If Artsakh is going to be within Azerbaijan, that's just an impossible, uh, you know, um, way of moving forward. That's an impossible future. They're just going to be dead. Okay, it's a forced displacement, or they're going to be dead. That's what they have to pretty much choose. The people of Artsakh.
The history of the world is full of wars. Just as an example, at many points in history, France and Germany were at war with each other for many reasons.
Hmm.
But these war crimes, I believe, they speak to the psyche of how Azerbaijanis feel about Armenians, you know?
Uh,
And this is crucial.
when I say Armenophobia, it's pretty much the official policy of Azerbaijan. There's no denying. There's no one is trying to say, no, that's not what we're doing. That's what's really happening. And if we're smart about it, when I say we, us Armenians around the world, we need to be able to use that against them, in asking all these at all these international forums are in presenting our demands, because this is going to be used against them. Of course, it's not the best argument. It's not, I mean, money buys everything. They are geographically, I don't know, richer. There's so much more political pressure happening from Russia, from Ukraine. Like, God knows what's happening in the world geopolitical games, so to speak. But at least we should be able to utilize this argument. And that's what CFTJ has been doing by, again, not just using allegations, not just hearsay stuff, but using factual evidence to confront the lies that they have been spreading in general about Armenians or about the war in Artsakh.
In June 2022, the CFTJ organized a large conference with a very diverse group of distinguished speakers. The entire conference was recorded and is available on the CFTJ website in full. Can you tell us what was this conference about and what were the goals of this conference?
It was actually a pretty huge conference. It was a conference that lasted for 3 days. The title was Human Rights and Accountability, the Aftermath of War. And the reason why we chose that title is because it's important what happens to the victims of war, especially as the Ukraine war was happening. We chose a theme that's going to resonate with other cultures so that more attention is going to be paid to the conference happening in Yerevan, Armenia. So that's why, again, like the Yerevan became a center of discussion where experts from 16 different countries arrived in Yerevan. And during a 3-day conference, I mean, so many topics were discussed. We had concurrent panels happening at the same time, so it was very, very expensive. However, uh, the result kind of paid off the work that was put in. It was very expensive when it comes to, money to organize such a large event, but at the same time, the at least we were able to show to the Armenians or to the victims that foreigners do care, that the experts do care, that there are a lot of scholars who have done extensive research on the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh or what happened during the Artsakh War. So that was the foremost, like one of the most important things. The second one was create a networking opportunity for the people in Armenia and also the international experts, so that they could exchange ideas or what can be done. Just create opportunities to connect, okay? Because we need the help of these experts when it comes to filing new reports or just asking for their advice how to go about a specific issue. For example, the UN speech that we're about to, deliver, we are seeking their advice. What do you recommend? Who should go? What kind of a resume should the person have? What should be the emphasis and things like that. So those were important connections that were built. But at the same time, very important, for example, when it came to the topic of self-determination panel, highly recommend you to watch that panel. It was a super interesting discussion. Ideas were exchanged that not a lot of people were familiar with. For example, we talked about self-determination and territorial integrity, but we always talked about those ideas being in competition, meaning they're competing ideas. But an interesting perspective was brought up that they're not, that, these both are in, could be, ascertained separately. So the panel discussions are super long, but they're very insightful. I recommend you to watch. Another interesting one that I was moderating was my interview with a former prisoner of Azerbaijan, Alexander Lapshin. And he was there. He talked about his own experiences when he was in prison, literally the basic stuff, like what food they provided him, the cell, what it looked like. Did he have a window? The psychological abuse that, he was forced to undergo. And interestingly enough, he was kept in the same prison where a lot of our current and former POWs are kept. So that was very interesting for some of the families of a POW who were also present in the audience to kind of listen to the conditions. And one thing I'll never forget from that conference is when Mr. Lopshin met another POW who had returned, who had also been in the same prison. And when they shook their hands, like, each other's hands, it was just, they were both silent. It's like they had this eye contact. It's as if only they knew what they went through, even though they're talking about it. They're, telling us about their experiences. But to witness that handshake was a very special moment, at least for me, because I don't know how to describe that, but they were both silent, but it was a very loud silence. It's like it spoke more than words could have conveyed at that point in time. Um, Additionally, we had a brother of a missing individual. I want to say, I mentioned the group of people who are completely missing. So we had a brother uh, who's um, whose brother is missing in action. He has no idea where he's at, whether he's alive or dead. And again, that was a life-changing experience for me as well. I had been in a very stressful and emotional situation before, but I didn't know even like how to answer his questions, his inquiries, what's going to be, the next step and all of that. So that was it's one thing to sit here in Los Angeles and talk about the issues, but it's a completely different story to be there on the ground and meet with these individuals and to be able to address or answer their questions. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with this testimony? How am I going to, get my brother back? That's the only answer that they're looking for. And it was a life-changing experience, I think, not just for me, but for all of the CFTJ. But overall, the conference was a forum for the organization to talk about, what we had done for the past year. And it's actually going to be happening again next year, I want to say May 2023. We are working already on the speakers. It just has to be a huge legal event for the Armenian legal professionals, the law students, And I think that's a great opportunity to create more friends of Armenia, and not just us Armenians, but foreigners who literally fell in love with the country. So that was kind of an amazing experience for them all.
Absolutely. I think it was a great conference. Of course, I saw the videos on the internet. I wasn't at the actual conference, but
Hmm.
it was such a diverse group of people. You'll never see this group of people at another conference again altogether, because it's just, all from different disciplines, not necessarily all attorneys.
Hmm.
Um, I just want to talk very briefly about Alexander Lopshin, because I think his case is very interesting, because he's one of the few people who has actually won a case against Azerbaijan at the European Court of Human Rights
Hmm.
for illegally detaining him.
Right. And he wants his case to be used as a precedent. Obviously he didn't get paid. Money wise, there was, I think, 30,000 euros that they issued, but obviously the Azerbaijani government has not paid that amount. I mean, it's like, that's a laughable amount, like, to even provide for all the torture that he had to go through. And I invite you all to go and watch that interview, because he does talk about in detail what they did. The psychological torture was very interesting. How they tried to um, convince him that it was day when it was night. So like just the time change, and changing the menu of his meals, and it's just insane. The extent to which they went in order to get what they want, and they were literally forcing him to say Karabakh is Azerbaijan, and his answer, like, why do I have to say? I have nothing to do with, where I'm not even Armenian. But that's um, their psyche. That's the extent that they go with, even foreigners who visit Artsakh, pretty much. So I invite you all to watch that. And to my question, to Mr. Lopshin about his case and all of that, his wish was like so that it could be used as a precedent, that something could be done with it. And we are thinking of various ways of bringing such cases against Azerbaijan. Maybe not directly through CFTJ, but that's something that definitely is in the works. One thing that we are doing for the POWs already is there's an individual complaint mechanism with the UN, the United Nations. So we are filing those complaints for the returned POWs already, but that requires a lot of paperwork in the sense that the POWs have to give their consent. There's always, some of them are scared to, put their names on anything, because they have been threatened by the Azeris that, this is what's going to happen to your friend if you say anything or you talk to anyone, the friend who's, and still in custody. So there's so many issues, so many layers of issues when you're dealing with such testimonies. So you have to be careful not to violate anyone's confidentialities, and make sure that the wishes of your um, eyewitness or witness is respected.
Can you tell us some of the ways in which the eyewitness testimonies obtained by the CFTJ have been used?
Of course, I think we talked about most of it, but it's 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 so diverse. You could do so much with it. Again, reports to various entities, the UN, the Congress, the local officials, or reports, the amicus briefs that could be used again at the International Court of Justice. uh, so many things that could be done with it, or even it could be used for advocacy purposes as well. Now, because there's one thing you have to keep in mind. Most of the time, you're collecting evidence when something is already done, like it's just a done deal, it's finished, it's not happening anymore. For example, when a crime takes place, the crime is completed. So you go out there and you collect testimonies or, witness testimonies. And in this case, it's happening while we're collecting testimonies. violations are happening on a daily basis. For example, there's the villages that are talked about, that are going to be turned to Azerbaijan, for example. As we speak, we're trying to collect evidence or preserve what's there so that if there is an issue with, for example, cultural heritage argument, that there was a destruction of some, site, we have evidence of what it was before or and the damage that was done in the past. I mean, and that will be done by Azeris in the future. So this is an ongoing conflict, and we're trying to collect evidence in the middle of it. So it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult to gain the trust of the witness to talk about the issues. It's extremely difficult to convince them that it's not going to be used for political purposes. This is something that I didn't really talk about during today's interview, but I really want to emphasize that CFTJ is not a political organization, completely apolitical. We are not guided, no directions are given like who to interview, why to interview, and things like that. And most importantly, our database is extremely secure. And no one has access to our evidence. No government has access to our evidence. I mean, they could petition only to use our evidence for litigation or legal cases. But if it has a political undertone, it's not going to be, they're not going to be, no one's going to be given access. So that's very important. I mean, it's open for everyone to use, however, with the caveat of it being not to be used for political purposes. That's very important. And because CFTJ it's an independent organization, a third neutral organization, and we want to always keep that reputation so that we could file such reports, whether that's with the UN, the ECHR, and that's extremely important to continue being an objective organization. So with that said, even for example, during a testimony, someone talks about something that was committed by an Armenian, that they had witnessed. It's still part of the testimony. We don't skip that. So that objectivity is always there, and that's kind of important when you're presenting such reports at such high levels. Anything else that we had done? I mean, like I said, we're only 2 years old, almost 2 years old. November, we're going to be 2 years old, but there's so many other projects that are happening as we speak. The biggest one that we're about to, well, it started, but we're gonna kind of do a lot more of it is those individual complaints that I talked about with the UN, because it's one thing to create a report for a group of people, but it's another thing to select that individual POW and write about them, the torture that they had witnessed. So it's like giving justice or making sure that they're heard somewhere at some forum. So that's very important for a POW to have that sense of redress.
The Center for Truth and Justice is an organization that was founded by Armenian lawyers and activists in response to the war crimes and human rights violations committed by Azerbaijan during the Artsakh War of 2020. The CFTJ trains lawyers and law students in Armenia and Artsakh to carry out the crucial work of recording eyewitness testimony from the many victims of the Artsakh War. The CFTJ is gathering and preserving this evidence for academic use and for use in legal cases. The CFTJ is also raising awareness of the many war crimes and violations of international law committed by Azerbaijan.
What I really want to end with, and this is, I think, what our organization is doing, is we have turned from warfare to lawfare. Pretty much, we're fighting in the legal courts, in the legal system, and that's a fight that has been, I think, underutilized for so many years, and that's something that we have to keep on, doing, and just expanding. It's a must, which is why this network is being created and it's being expanded by, utilizing so many international experts. Um, we have to concentrate. If we can't win in the, battlefield, we have to at least be able to win in a court of law. So that's the least that we could do for Armenia. And I do encourage, if you are an attorney, if you're a law student interested, join the fight. It's an extremely rewarding experience. So just get in touch with us. There's always work to be done, whether you could, put in an hour a week, 2 hours a week, 5 hours a week, or more than that, whatever it is, it's definitely an extremely rewarding experience.
Melina, thank you for joining us today. I also want to thank our viewers for watching.
Thank you for having me, and I definitely appreciate all the time that you took to research about our organization. It means a lot. So this was a very substantive interview, and I appreciate for the opportunity.
My guest today is Meline Mailyan. She's a lawyer specializing in immigration law and the co founder and board member of the Center for Truth and Justice, joining us today from Glendale, California.